unsatisfaction. Two cold words. Insensitive words spoken by the richest man on the planet. And for Lauren Sánchez, those words were not just a rejection. They were a sentence that would echo across her entire life. Because how could a woman who had once been celebrated as the glamorous billionaire bride fall so fast from grace in less than 30 days? How could a fairy tale wedding in Venice transform into a global scandal that raised questions about love, loyalty, money, and the brutal power? Games of the Elite, before we continue, make sure you subscribe and give this video a like. Because what we are about to reveal is not the glittering fantasy that filled magazine covers. This is the untold story of betrayal contracts, legal warfare, and a revenge strategy so meticulous that even Hollywood scriptwriters could not have written it better. The wedding of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez was no ordinary event. It was described as the most lavish wedding of the decade. A ceremony that mixed royalty glamour and the cold shine of unimaginable wealth. The canals of Venice sparkled with chandeliers flown in from Paris. The gowns were custom-made by designers whose names were whispered like sacred prayers. Every guest list detail, every camera angle was carefully chosen to present a fairy tale love story. But, as we now know beneath the surface, the truth was very different. Insiders revealed that the smiles were rehearsed, the glamour was staged, and the vows themselves carried the weight of hidden clauses and contracts that would later become weapons. Jeff Bezos has always been a man of calculation. Those who worked with him at Amazon describe him as someone who plans 3 steps ahead in business and 10 steps ahead in life. Nothing he does is impulsive, so when he uttered the words, "I do," the world assumed it was the final chapter of a whirlwind romance. But now, evidence suggests it was only the beginning of a master plan, a plan designed to protect his empire and to dismantle Lauren piece by piece should she ever cross a line. And that line was drawn long before the first guest boarded a gondola in Venice, because months before the wedding, legal teams were already at work building a prenuptial agreement. Unlike any other document in history, this was not a simple contract to divide assets. This was a fortress, a legal masterpiece, hundreds of pages long, written by the most powerful attorneys in America. Sources close to the process call it a financial weapon of mass destruction. It contained rules of conduct, social media restrictions, clauses that would monitor Lauren's business relationships, and trigger points that could strip her of billions if she stepped out of line. One lawyer who reviewed parts of it said, "I have seen corporate acquisition contracts with fewer restrictions. This was not a marriage agreement. It was an employment contract disguised as love." And yet Lauren signed it. She signed it under the kind of pressure that very few people could withstand. Imagine the world waiting for your wedding, the press circling like vultures, the magazines preparing front-page spreads. And at that moment, you are handed a 200-page contract sign. It or the wedding is canceled. No time for negotiation, no independent lawyer to protect you. Only an ultimatum. Lauren signed and in that moment sealed a fate she did not yet understand. Fast forward less than a month later, and the trap was sprung, the same document that promised. Security now became the instrument of her destruction. Sources reveal that every action Lauren took during the marriage, from Instagram posts to magazine interviews, was quietly logged by Bezos' team as evidence, each public appearance, each attempt. To use her new status for influence was added to a growing file, a file that would one day be unleashed against her. And when that day came, it came with devastating force. Reports suggest that Lauren was blindsided. She thought the honeymoon phase would protect her. She believed the image of a power couple was untouchable, but Bezos had been preparing for the fall long before she realized the danger when the legal storm arrived. It was not a drizzle, it was a hurricane, lawsuits filed in multiple courts, assets, frozen cease and desist letters delivered to her business partners, social invitations evaporating overnight in a matter of days. Lauren went from billionaire bride to isolated fugitive, a woman whose entire life had been meticulously erased. And then came those 2 words too late, delivered not in anger, not in passion, but in the same cold voice Bezos uses to shut down an underperforming business unit. Those 2 words ended not just a marriage, but a dream, a plan, a carefully crafted public image. Lauren begged, she called, she texted, She even appeared in person at his office. But the response was always the same. Too late to understand the brutality of this move. You have to see it not as a breakup, but as an execution. A former legal expert who reviewed some of the documents said this was not divorce. This was annihilation. Bezos did not just take her money, he took her future. He closed every door that marriage had opened. He stripped away not only her assets, but also her ability to leverage her status in public for branding deals or business opportunities. And the genius of it all lay in the clauses of that prenuptial agreement. Clauses she had signed under duress without fully understanding their consequences. One clause in particular has been nicknamed the $5 billion boomerang. Legal experts whisper about it with both awe and fear. It stipulates that if Lauren used her marriage for personal gain without explicit approval, every financial right she held would be extinguished instantly. And now that very clause is being used to dismantle her case against him. Every interview, every magazine cover, every staged appearance that once built her brand is now evidence against her. She built her own coffin, said one attorney, and Bezos simply closed the lid. What makes this even more chilling is that the wedding itself may have been part of the trap. Guests assumed they were witnessing a celebration, but insiders claim every detail was designed. As a data-gathering operation, the photographers were not just taking wedding pictures. They were recording interactions, listening for conversations, building files, witnesses to her behavior. One guest later admitted, "I thought I was at a wedding, but now I realize I was part of a case file." So why would Bezos do this? Why would the richest man in the world marry a woman only to dismantle her so publicly? Some point to betrayal whispers of broken trust and affairs that cut deeper than financial. Losses because this was not just about love, it was about loyalty, friendship, and the sacred rules of the billionaire circle. Insiders say Lauren had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and when that line was crossed, Bezos did not respond. With emotion, he responded with strategy. Friends who once welcomed Lauren into their inner circle now describe the fallout as catastrophic. Relationships worth billions collapsed overnight. Political alliances shifted, social circles closed their doors. The betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. And in the rarefied world of the ultra-wealthy, betrayal is punished not with tears, but with total erasure. Lauren was not simply divorced, she was exiled, and as this exile unfolded, Jeff Bezos was seen calm, focused, unshaken, as if everything was happening exactly as he had planned. Because perhaps it was insiders suggest he had allowed Lauren to make mistakes that violated the prenuptial agreement months before he acted, he collected evidence he let her hang herself with her own decisions. And when the time was right, he activated the trap for Lauren. This realization came too late. By the time she understood the scale of the disaster, every escape route was closed, assets locked, lawyers circling her reputation collapsing. She was not just losing a husband, she was losing an empire, and the man who once promised forever looked her in the eye and ended it with 2 words too late. And this is just the beginning, because behind those 2 words lies a web of secrets, legal maneuvers, and psychological games that show how power truly operates at the highest level in Hollywood and beyond. To truly understand what unfolded after those 2 words, too late, we have to look deeper into the document that shaped this entire saga, the prenuptial agreement that lawyers now whisper about, like it is a forbidden manuscript. It was not just a set of financial protections, it was a roadmap of destruction, a carefully engineered instrument that could turn love into litigation at the flick of a switch. And Jeff Bezos built it with the same precision he once applied to designing the Amazon empire. The agreement was not drafted in a week or even a month. Insiders reveal that it took teams of attorneys nearly a year to complete. Every clause was debated, every word tested for loopholes. It was the kind of document where a single misplaced comma could change the course of billions. One legal source explained, Bezos approached it like he was preparing for a rocket launch. There were backup plans for backup plans, contingencies for every possible scenario, including betrayals that had not yet occurred. It was chess, not checkers, and Lauren never realized she had stepped onto the board at the heart of this document. Were what the lawyers called trigger acts. These were specific behaviors that, if committed, would instantly void Lauren's financial rights. It could be something as simple as appearing in a magazine cover without written permission or posting on social media in a way that implied she was using the marriage for personal gain. The rules were so strict that one attorney said it resembled a corporate non-compete clause more than a marriage agreement. Imagine entering into a relationship where even your Instagram captions could cost you billions, and yet that was the reality Lauren faced. Why would she agree to such terms? The answer lies in timing. Insiders say the agreement was presented at the most vulnerable moment, right before the wedding. When the pressure was unbearable, the media was already preparing headlines. The designers had shipped gowns worth hundreds of thousands. The guests were flying across the world to Venice. And at that moment, Lauren was told sign, or the wedding is off, with no independent lawyer at her side and no realistic choice. She signed. It was the classic billionaire play. The contract was not just about money, it was about control. Control of narrative, control of influence, and ultimately control of destiny. And when the day came that Bezos decided the marriage had run its course, that control became absolute. Lauren's lawyers were stunned by the speed of the assault. Assets were frozen within hours. Accounts locked, contracts canceled. She was cut off from wealth faster than a server shutting down at Amazon headquarters. One attorney described it as a legal blitzkrieg, a strike. So fast and so overwhelming that there was no room for defense. The most chilling part was the clause nicknamed the $5 billion boomerang. It stated that if Lauren engaged in any unauthorized branding activity, all her financial rights would be extinguished immediately, and Bezos did not need to prove intent-only action. Every public appearance Lauren had made, every interview, every glamorous photo shoot was cataloged as evidence against her. She thought she was building her public image, but in reality, she was building her own prosecution file sources. Say Lauren was in shock when she realized this. She believed the marriage would elevate her status forever. But instead, the very tools she used to climb higher became the knives that cut her down. One lawyer remarked it was like watching someone build a ladder and then realizing the ladder was attached to a trapdoor. But this story is not only about contracts and lawyers. It is about betrayal at the highest level. Because what triggered Bezos to finally act was not a magazine cover or a careless Instagram post. It was whispers of betrayal, whispers that cut into the heart of trust and loyalty in the billionaire circle. Insiders speak of broken friendships, of secrets shared, and then exposed, of loyalties tested and failed. The betrayal was not only romantic, it was personal. And in that rarefied circle, personal betrayal is the deadliest sin for years. Bezos and Lauren had moved in circles where trust was currency. Friendships were not just social connections, they were business partnerships, political alliances, billion-dollar deals resting on handshakes and mutual loyalty. When Lauren crossed that line, it was not only Bezos she betrayed, it was an entire ecosystem, and when that ecosystem turned against her, she was left with nothing. No allies, no defenders, no protection. The fallout was immediate. Invitations disappeared. Business partners stopped returning calls. Friends who had once posed for photos vanished from her life overnight. A Hollywood insider put it bluntly, yesterday. She was a billionaire princess today. She is nobody. And in the world of the ultra-wealthy being, nobody is the ultimate punishment. What makes this saga so fascinating is the way Bezos orchestrated it with the calm precision of a general leading a campaign. He did not rage, he did not shout, he simply executed a plan that had been waiting for years. Insiders suggest he even allowed Lauren to step into mistakes, deliberately letting her violate the prenuptial clauses while he documented everything, like a chess master sacrificing pieces to trap the queen. The coldness of it all was breathtaking, and when the time came to strike, he looked her in the eye and ended it with 2 words too late for Lauren. It was not just a personal tragedy. It was an erasure. Her businesses collapsed, her public image crumbled, her access to elite circles vanished. Even her social media accounts became liabilities, evidence in a case she could not win. She was cornered not only by legal documents, but by the invisible walls of social exile. And here lies the deeper question: was this ever a love story at all? Or was it a game from the very beginning? A game of power, wealth, and image. A game that Lauren entered believing she could play, but in truth, The rules had been written long before she arrived. The wedding in Venice that looked like a fairy tale may have been nothing more than the opening move of a larger strategy. Every chandelier, every guest, every staged photograph doubling as evidence for a future battle that only Bezos knew was coming. Sources who worked on the wedding now admit that there were unusual instructions. Photographers were told to capture not only beauty, but interactions notes were taken about who spoke to whom. Even the seating arrangements were designed. Like a strategic map, one guest confessed, "I thought I was part of a glamorous celebration. Now I realize I was part of a case file." And so the trap tightened. Lauren tried to resist. She called, she texted, she begged, but every path was blocked. The legal team had prepared for every angle, every appeal, every desperate move. The empire of the richest man in the world was turned against her like a machine, and she was powerless to stop it. This was not just a divorce. It was a demonstration, a message to anyone who thought they could cross a man who built an empire from nothing. The message was clear: betray me, and you do not just lose me, you lose everything. And in the silence that followed those two words, "too late," the world began to realize that what had looked like a fairy tale was in fact the coldest calculation of all. The reverberations of those two words, "too late," spread far beyond the gilded walls of the Venetian palazzo where they were first spoken. What began as a personal fracture became a public implosion, and soon the fallout swept across Hollywood, Washington, and every elite circle that had once embraced Lauren Sánchez. Because in the world she had entered, reputation was not just image, it was currency. And when that currency collapsed, so did everything else. Suddenly, the invitations dried up. Premieres, once desperate for her presence, suddenly had no seats left. Galas mysteriously lost her name from their guest lists. Designers who had courted her with gowns worth six figures suddenly declared collections closed to her PR teams that once pitched her as a glamorous power couple alongside Bezos now avoided calls. Insiders whispered that her presence was radioactive, that to be seen with her was to risk being pulled into a storm engineered by the richest man on Earth. And here is where the psychological warfare began, because this was not only a legal strike, it was a campaign of social erasure. Insiders close to Bezos insist that he never shouted, never issued threats, never raised a hand. Instead, his silence was weaponized. Every whisper that Lauren was untrustworthy, every suggestion that she had violated confidence, every rumor of disloyalty became amplified through elite networks, where perception is reality, and reality is punishment. Lauren did not just lose money, she lost standing. And standing in Hollywood is everything. The cruelest part was how subtle it all was, because there was no dramatic announcement, no press conference, no public shaming. There was only absence, silence where there had once been noise, exclusion where there had once been inclusion. Lauren described it to a confidant as drowning in plain sight, still visible to the world, but gasping for air as doors closed one by one. Lawyers who reviewed the prenuptial documents say the cruelty was not accidental. It was written into the very structure of the agreement, because the clauses did not merely strip financial rights, they isolated her. They prohibited alliances with media, they restricted independent projects. They limited even her ability to tell her own story. The contract was a gag disguised as protection. One attorney summarized it bluntly: she was silenced before she ever spoke. In the days that followed, Lauren attempted to rally allies in Hollywood circles, but those allies had already recalculated the cost of loyalty. Friendships are negotiable when billions are at stake. The directors, the producers, the moguls who once toasted her at rooftop parties now ghosted her with the cold efficiency of a declined credit card. The calculation was simple: align with Bezos and remain in the circle, or defend Lauren and risk exile. Nobody chose exile. What made it even more devastating was the psychological precision behind it all. Bezos did not simply want separation, he wanted demonstration. A lesson written in the social fabric of the elite class that betrayal carried consequences greater than any courtroom verdict. And so every silent phone, every canceled invitation, every headline that omitted her name was part of a broader strategy, not just to punish, but to erase. And yet there is another layer to this saga, one that reveals the fragility of power itself. Because in constructing this cage, Bezos also exposed the machinery of his empire. The world now saw how influence operated, not through official channels, but through invisible levers. The favors, the calls, the quiet instructions passed through intermediaries. Suddenly, those levers were visible to everyone. And visibility is dangerous because what had once been silent, influence now looked like control. And control, when exposed, looks like tyranny for Lauren. The psychological toll was immense. Insiders say she would stare at her phone waiting for messages that never came. She would draft replies to articles that painted her as careless or disloyal, only to delete them, knowing any statement could be twisted against her. She was trapped in a silence that screamed louder than words, and that silence became her prison. But Hollywood loves a comeback story, and whispers began that Lauren was considering her own counterstrike. Not in court where the contract left her defenseless, but in narrative, because in Hollywood, story is power. And if she could not win in legal documents, perhaps she could win in perception. One confidant suggested that Lauren had begun meeting quietly with writers, producers, journalists, considering whether her only weapon left was to tell the story from her side and frame herself not as a schemer, but as a survivor. The irony was brutal. The same media machine that once amplified her glamour could now be the only avenue for redemption. But here again, the contract loomed large, because any unauthorized attempt to monetize her narrative could trigger further penalties. Every option carried risk one wrong step, and she would not only remain erased, she would be destroyed completely. What makes this chapter of the saga resonate so deeply is its reflection of a broader truth in the celebrity elite world. Loyalty is conditional, love is transactional, and betrayal is terminal. Lauren entered believing she was building a life of permanence. She discovered she was only a placeholder, a character in a larger script written by others. Her tragedy was not merely personal, it was structural. She collided with the machinery of power and learned that machinery does not forgive the fallout extended beyond her alone, because those who watched carefully, those who inhabited the same rarefied circles, took note. The lawyers, the influencers, the business partners, they all saw what happened to Lauren and they adjusted accordingly. They tightened their own agreements, they scrutinized their own alliances. They reminded themselves that in this world, to cross the wrong person is not just to lose money, but to lose existence. Lauren's silence became a warning label, a cautionary tale played in whispers across cocktail parties from Malibu to Monaco. And so we arrive at the chilling truth. Too late was not merely a personal verdict. It was a cultural one, a phrase that signaled the end of innocence for anyone who believed love alone could protect them in the world of billionaires. It was a reminder that every smile might hide strategy, every embrace might conceal calculation, and every contract might be the opening act of a tragedy yet to unfold. As the dust settled over Venice and the echoes of Too Late faded into memory, attention turned to the finer details of the agreement, the hidden clauses whispered about in legal circles, and nicknamed traps, because each one seemed designed not only to protect wealth, but to anticipate betrayal. Lawyers now admit they had never seen such precision before. Clauses that mapped out scenarios years in advance, clauses that treated affection as liability and companionship as risk management. Insiders say there were at least 7 of these traps carefully hidden in the dense pages of the prenup, each more devastating than the last. The first was called the Silence Clause. It prevented Lauren from writing, publishing, or collaborating on any memoir, article, or documentary about the relationship without written permission. Failure to comply would not only void her claims, it would impose financial penalties so large they could erase her remaining assets. The second was the Image Clause. This restricted her ability to use the marriage as leverage for branding. Every public appearance, every endorsement, every photo shoot could be interpreted as a violation. The third was the Circle Clause. It barred her from maintaining business or personal ties with any individual considered a rival or adversary. To Bezos, a clause so vague that it could apply to dozens of names, effectively isolating her from entire networks. The fourth was the Influence Clause. This prevented Lauren from engaging in political fundraising or advocacy that could create the appearance of influence through marriage. The fifth was the Inheritance Clause, which structured assets in such a way that nothing could pass without strict oversight. The sixth was the confidentiality clause, which forbade her from disclosing any detail about internal business discussions. And the seventh, the most devastating of all, was the boomerang clause that automatically stripped her of rights if she breached any of the others, ensuring that even one mistake would cascade into total loss. It was an iron web with no escape routes, a labyrinth where every turn led back to the same dead end, and when observers looked back at the wedding in Venice, they realized it was not just a celebration, it was evidence. The photographs, the guest lists, the lavish details all doubled as material to demonstrate compliance with image clauses. The fairy tale was in fact a legal stage set where every laugh, every dance, every kiss beneath chandeliers could later be reframed as contractual performance. Even the romantic gondola rides now looked different, less like spontaneous love, more like curated exhibits for a case file. The ripple effects did not stop at Lauren or at Hollywood. They extended into politics, business, and media, because every elite figure who watched this saga unfold took note. Politicians tightened their alliances, journalists reconsidered their stories, moguls reevaluated who they trusted. One Washington strategist observed that it was less a divorce and more a geopolitical signal showing how personal lives at that level bleed into power structures, global in scope. It was no longer about who loved whom, it was about who controlled narrative access and influence. And yet, in the midst of this silence, one question remained. Could Lauren stage a comeback redemption? Arcs are Hollywood's favorite genre, but hers would be the most difficult of all because the contract silenced her, the networks abandoned. Her and the empire that erased her showed no sign of loosening its grip. Still whispers emerged of possible strategies. Perhaps a quiet return through humanitarian projects framed as independent of her past. Perhaps alliances with media figures willing to risk alignment, perhaps even legal challenges on the grounds of coercion. Though experts admit her chances are slim, each path carries peril but also possibility. And Hollywood always leaves room for possibility as the story concludes. One truth stands above the rest. Too late was not only a phrase spoken to Lauren Sánchez, it was a phrase spoken to anyone who enters the orbit of immense power. Too late to realize the rules were written before you arrive, too late to understand that love can be weaponized, too late to recognize that every smile may conceal a strategy and every embrace may mask a contract. The saga of Bezos and Sanchez is not merely a scandal, it is a parable, a modern tragedy that reminds us that in the world of the ultra-wealthy, the line between love and litigation is thinner than a sheet of paper, and sometimes that paper is a contract, and so the curtain falls. The fairy tale is over, the gondolas have drifted away. The chandeliers are dark, and the palace is empty, but the story remains carved into the history of Hollywood and high society. A warning, a lesson, a spectacle too late became not just the ending of one romance, but the beginning of a cautionary tale for a generation. And as the world watches, the silence left behind may be louder than the vows ever spoken. At the end of the day, Hollywood isn't just about glamour and red carpets. It's about power, secrets, and the scandals that often stay hidden until the truth forces its way into the spotlight. Whether it's courtroom drama, relationship, chaos, or behind-the-scenes deals, one thing is certain: the story never ends here, and as always, we'll be watching, digging, and uncovering the pieces others try to keep buried.